Back when I reviewed the first episode of Loki, I resolved that I wasn't going to individually hate review each episode, and so I haven't. But I never said I wouldn't hate review the whole series, and so here we are. I last reported on episode 3, which, if I remember correctly, I synopsized, and quite accurately, I might add, as walking and talking, sitting and talking, walking and talking, standing and talking, walking and talking, dudes fighting ladies, the end. That was the point at which I stopped caring enough to watch the episodes when they came out, so I waited until the thing was over and then watched the last 3 installments of this dog shit series so I could deliver to you, Mr. and Mrs. Viewer, a fittingly hostile series review. And first, I have to say, it takes serious conviction for the producers of this show at the end of a series that is defined by interminably long stretches of characters talking and talking and talking and talking about crap nobody cares about, to deliver a series finale, or a season finale, I guess it is, but more on that later, that is 10 minutes of walking and talking, followed by 30 full minutes of 3 people sitting in a room talking, briefly punctuated by the 2 main characters trying to cut each other's heads off with swords for no apparent reason. I know I ask this question a lot when I'm reviewing things, but only because I feel like it warrants being asked. Who is this for? What is the target audience? I feel like I know more of the Marvel comic book lore than your average normie on the street. But in this 6th episode of Loki, my God, you've got these characters sitting and doing half-hour-long deep dive discussions of comic book lore that is on a level that is completely over my head. I mean, I'm vaguely aware of who Kang the Conqueror is, but if I hadn't gone to YouTube afterward to find out, I would have had no idea that's who this black dude in the boss castle at the end of the video game quest was supposed to be. And about 80% of the episode is this guy monologuing. If I was someone whose knowledge of Marvel properties was limited to what I've seen in the MCU, this series would have left me confused as all hell. So again, who is this for? And admittedly, I know I give this disclaimer every time, but my comic book knowledge ends abruptly in about 1986-87 because I stopped caring about cartoons and comics at right exactly the same moment when I discovered beer and boobs. But hey, no judgment, your mileage may vary. If you're a grown-ass man in your 40s who plays with action figures and watches cartoons, then more power to you. I'm just telling you about my truth and my lived experience. So apparently the whole point of the Loki series is to set up the events of the next Doctor Strange movie and the next Ant-Man movie, so I guess that makes it some sort of long-form commercial for a couple of altogether different products. And as perverse as that sounds, it's probably the best explanation for why this thing sucks so incredibly hard. Because from where I'm sitting, Loki is the worst thing to come out of the MCU that is not Captain Marvel. I don't know who it's supposed to be for. I don't know what I'm supposed to get out of it as an MCU fan, and I don't know how you can make 6 episodes of a series, each 3/4 of an hour in length, which is overwhelmingly dominated by characters talking to one another, but in which somehow, astoundingly, no character development seems to take place. And if you want to understand what the hell these characters were talking about, well, you'll have to buy tickets for a couple of movies that come out next year and the year after that. So I give Loki a suck-o-meter rating of 8 bags of dicks out of a possible 10 bags of dicks. And they're bringing this thing back for a 2nd season. So what's next? Talking while riding bicycles? Gardening and talking? Cooking and talking? Fishing and talking? Rock climbing and talking? Needlepoint and talking? But who cares anyway? As long as we get to see random outbursts of male-on-female violence, then the talking is a small price to pay. But that's just about enough for Loki. Jim Eagle's going to hit the music now, and then we will move on to Black Widow. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where sitting and talking always takes a back seat to jousting and feasting. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the Saturday special. I am your eponymous host and humble servant, and we need to talk about things I'm in favor of. Now, if I were to sit down and draft a comprehensive list of the things in this world that I'm in favor of, Scarlett Johansson's ass would be pretty close to the top of that list. And so I am very happy to report that despite some early reports to the contrary, that this was going to be the Me Too Marvel movie where female sexuality would be treated like so much radioactive sludge, Black Widow does in fact contain several wondrously long, close, ponderous shots of Ms. Johansson's caboose, America's ass, if you will, and there is no ass that deserves the attention more. And you haven't heard one complaint at all from anyone about these ass shots because Black Widow was directed by a woman. If, on the other hand, the picture had been helmed by a male director and those exact same ass shots were in it, well, it would be an international scandal. We all know it would be. There would be all of the obligatory bullshit caterwauling about the male gaze and the objectification of women, all the same nonsense we've heard 1,000 times before from miserable, joyless people who want to deprive us of most or all of life's pleasures, including the perfectly innocent, perfectly normative, perfectly wholesome act of taking a nice, long look at a beautiful woman's backside. So, we first meet Natasha Romanoff in 1995 as an 11-year-old girl from Ohio with blue hair. Having lived in 1995, having a fairly clear recollection of the time period, I can state with a reasonable degree of certitude that there were no 11-year-old girls with blue hair in 1995. I knew a guy with blue hair around that time, but he was in his 20s and he was a drummer, so that explains that. In the opening scenes of Black Widow, I was struck by the portrayal of what was seemingly a normal, healthy nuclear family. Because when do you ever see nuclear family units depicted on TV or in films anymore, except as a precursor to the dad being exposed as a murderer or a molester or some sort of monster? In this case, of course, the dad winds up being a Russian spy, and the mom, and Natasha, but the other little girl, the 6-year-old, is too young to know she's a spy, so she thinks this is her real life and these are her real parents. But it turns out the jig is up because dad comes home from work and informs mom that their cover is blown and they're being pulled out and they need to GTFO as quickly as possible. 6-year-old Yelena complains that she hasn't had a chance to eat her dinner and she's still hungry, and dad replies with a classic dad line. "Don't worry, honey, I've got some fruit roll-ups in the car." That one cracks me up, man. That is good stuff. So they bug out, they pile into the car, head out of town, and here I think we see a very effective use of the song American Pie by Don McLean. Probably the best use of diegetic music that we've seen in the MCU outside of the Guardians of the Galaxy films. Yelena requests the playing of the song just because it's her favorite song that she enjoys, but for Natasha, who for all she knows is leaving the United States for the last time, who's trying to soak in every image that she sees on her way out, the song plays sort of like an epitaph for this life that she liked and didn't wish to leave. And they drive to this abandoned airfield where they have a plane stashed in which to make their escape. They've got SHIELD agents hot on their tail. There's an exchange of gunfire. Mom gets hit in the gut while she's trying to get the plane airborne, as dad is hanging onto the wing shooting it out with the SHIELD agents. So Natasha has to jump into the front seat and help out with the takeoff. And that's when mom says, "Hit the accelerator." And look, not everybody knows about airplane stuff, and that's fine. But if you're writing a script in which people are flying an airplane, you might want to run it past someone who knows airplane jargon and can tell you there ain't no accelerator on no airplane because airplanes have throttles and cars have accelerators. And yeah, you can say I'm a nitpicker for calling attention to something like that. Maybe I am. But when you're spending in the neighborhood of $200 goddamn million on these productions, it seems inconceivable, to me at least, with all the layers of editorial and managerial oversight that exist, for an error like that to make it into the final product. Because that is bad quality control. So they managed to make their escape from SHIELD, and since the U.S. government evidently has no airplanes and no radar at their disposal, they managed to fly unmolested from Ohio all the way to Cuba. And was dad hanging onto the wing that entire time? And who did the landing? Because mom was shot in the gut last time I checked. Natasha's not a pilot, and the 6-year-old is a 6-year-old. But whether it was gut shot mama or the blue-haired 11-year-old, somebody sure stuck that landing, baby. And if we hadn't figured it out yet, this is the point at which the movie tries to make it abundantly clear that the mom and dad are Russian spies by having them switch from perfect, unaccented American English to speaking with fake Russian accents. But having said that, In a film in which probably 75% of the dialogue is American actors doing fake Russian accents, it comes off better than it has any business coming off. Whenever you have American actors doing Russian accents, you're always perilously close to landing in Boris and Natasha territory. We will catch moose and squirrels, then go to dacha, play chess, drink vodka, yes? And I'm probably more highly attuned to bad accents than most people, but I thought it was done as tastefully as it could have been, and it was hardly ever distracting. Florence Pugh, who plays the adult version of Yelena, gets special credit here, I think. If I didn't know better, I might actually think she was Russian. So we're at the abandoned airfield in Cuba. We meet the general who winds up being the big bad villain in the end, and we ascertain that Alexei, the dad, is the former Red Guardian, the Soviet counterpart to Captain America, if you will. And in Russia, when they decide a conversation is over, they just sneak up behind you and stick a needle in your neck, and so ends the prologue. And then we get to a title sequence that felt very weird to me for a Marvel movie. And not just because Marvel movies don't normally have the title sequence at the beginning, but because it feels more like a title sequence you'd see in a Zack Snyder film. You've got a subdued, low-key cover version of a well-known song performed by a female singer, just like Snyder did in Batman v Superman and the first version of Justice League. Which, in this case, the song smells like Teen Spirit, and the cover version doesn't do anything to make it suck less, because, yeah, I still hate Nirvana, and I still make no apologies for it. There's lots of slow motion, which of course is another staple of the Zack Snyder method, and the sequence of images they use is meant to function largely as an exposition dump, which in the MCU only has one antecedent, I think, and you have to go all the way back to The Incredible Hulk, where in that film's title sequence they took bits and pieces of the scenes that they deleted and turned them into a title sequence in the hopes of imparting the same story information in far less time. And here I noticed something else that probably fits into the nitpicking category, but who cares? The girl who plays 11-year-old blue-haired Natasha, when I first saw her on the screen, I thought she bears an incredibly strong resemblance to someone, but I can't think of who it is. Because she's got these eyes that are such bright blue, they almost look incandescent. And then I read somewhere that she was the daughter of Mila Jovovich, and I thought, yup, that makes sense. That is exactly whose eyes those are. But here's the thing. In the title sequence, when they're portraying a slightly older Natasha, like in the adolescent range, that actress has brown eyes. Then you get to Scarlett Johansson, and she's got greenish eyes. I'm just saying, with all the shit they can do with CGI these days, couldn't they have fixed it so the two child actresses had something close to the same eye color as the adult actress who's playing the character? It just seems like a weird oversight. But who knows, maybe I'm the only loser who even noticed. Next, we catch up with adult Yelena, who's still working for the Black Widow program, which Natasha left when she joined S.H.I.E.L.D. and became an Avenger and all that good stuff. She's in hot pursuit of a rogue widow who's in possession of some magic red pixie dust that makes you no longer be mind-controlled when you breathe it in. So Yelena catches up with the rogue widow, they fight, Yelena gains the upper hand, plunges a knife deep into the other girl's belly, twists it 90 degrees, and then slices her gut right open, hip to hip, like harakiri style, which of course should have caused this girl's viscera to spill all over Yelena's head, but this is a Marvel movie after all, so we don't even see any blood. As this chick is laying on the ground, expiring from having her guts ripped out, it looks little more like she just tore her shirt and maybe spilled a drink on herself. But she succeeds at the last moment in spraying the magic pixie dust on Yelena before she breathes her last. So Yelena instantly sees the error of her ways, plunges a knife into her own thigh, removes her tracking device, gets up, and jogs off without so much as a limp. Because I can totally do that after I've just stabbed myself in the leg, can't you, you pussy? So Yelena is entrusted by the colleague she just violently disemboweled with the remaining vials of the pixie dust, which she immediately mails to Natasha, to whom she hasn't spoken in 25 years. Why? Don't know. Natasha is then attacked by the Taskmaster, a villain from the comics who, in a twist you will never see coming, is revealed later on to be a lady. A gender-swapped villain in a Marvel film. What shockingly unforeseen thing will they think of next? And yes, this film does feature quite a few tropes that have become standard issue fare at this point, but It also has the luxury of being a story that is entirely self-contained, since it's a story set in the past about a character whose death we have already seen, so it doesn't get saddled with having to set up characters and events in other upcoming movies, and consequently there is a lot more character development in this movie than you normally get in your typical MCU installment. The character of Yelena in particular has a fully formed arc in this movie, like a real character arc, which we so rarely see in this genre, at least not insofar as it takes place within the confines of a single film. But we meet Yelena as a child, then we meet her again as a trained assassin, and as she's breaking herself free from that life, we get a few character development scenes where people sitting and talking actually serves a purpose and advances the story and fleshes out the characters, makes them more fully realized, rather than just people sitting around talking for the sake of sitting around talking or dumping exposition for some other movie that comes out 2 years from now. Alexei, the Red Guardian, he also has a fully formed character arc here. We learn who he is, what motivates him, what's important to him, and we learn that he has genuine care and affection for these two women whose father he pretended to be for a few years back in the mid-90s. The scene between him and Yelena in the bedroom when he acts just the way a caring father should act around an upset adult daughter is some pretty powerful stuff, even though they're both wearing ridiculous superhero outfits. The third act, it's mostly standard issue MCU smash and punch, which is too bad because up until that point they were telling the most grounded, most realistic story that we've probably yet seen in the MCU. Right up until they get to the floating base in the sky where the evil general keeps all of the Black Widows, which has been up there purportedly for decades, using some unknown, unexplained, gravity-defying technology, because they show it floating amongst the clouds, so it's not in orbit. And of course it's gone totally unnoticed this entire time, because that is what the story requires. Now this movie has a bit of a problem with Black Widow's power level. At times, it seems unable to decide whether she's a person or a supernatural demigod, because she's supposed to be just a person who is a highly trained assassin and martial artist, but still 100% mortal and human nonetheless. But then she takes a 100-foot fall, smacking into half a dozen objects on the way down, and lands on her feet, clutching her stomach, pained expression on her face, but otherwise none the worse for wear, after a fall that would be fatal 100 times out of 100. Okay, maybe 99, because there possibly is a 1 in 100 scenario where you wouldn't die and you would just wind up a quadriplegic. But that's not the worst of it. The worst of it is when Yelena gets blown off the big flying sky-base thingy. She's hurtling towards certain death from however many thousand feet up. So Natasha grabs a parachute, jumps off the flying sky-base thingy, flies through a helicopter, catches up with Yelena, grabs her, straps the parachute onto her while she's unconscious, deploys the chute, lets her go, starts free-falling again, and then takes the time to fight Taskmaster while sky-surfing on a broken piece of building. And then they're grabbed onto each other, and somebody deploys a parachute about 20 feet off the ground, and they're both fine. So then they start fighting again, because obviously. Now, I mentioned before that the sky base was floating amongst the clouds, so it is not in an orbit, but it sure seemed like Natasha was free-falling for a hell of a long time. So I timed it, and then I did some sophisticated calculations that involved plugging the numbers into a website, and I determined that the time of free fall would require a starting altitude of 95,377 feet, which is way, way, way the hell higher than any damn clouds. And am I a pedantic loser for going to the trouble of fact-checking a silly comic book movie? Yeah, probably, but that's not important now. I haven't watched many reviews of Black Widow yet, only one or two. But based on what I've seen from thumbnails and headlines and so on, it seems like it's not being very well received. But I wonder how much of that has to do with the movie itself, as opposed to the things that have been said during its promotion. And to be sure, Scarlett Johansson herself has said just some colossally stupid stuff in the past couple of weeks about how oppressive it is being the highest paid actress in Hollywood, about how unfairly women are treated in the industry, and even though you can tell she's just doing her best to vomit out the fashionable platitudes she thinks she's supposed to vomit out, I think that some people, perhaps a lot of people, are judging the movie through the prism of those ill-judged remarks rather than on its own merits. It's too bad this thing couldn't have been made during the time period it depicts between Civil War and Infinity War, because had it been, I think it probably would have been highly successful and more well-received than it has been. And with as many times as this film was pushed back, it's easy to forget it was in production, 3, nearly 4 years ago now, before all the woke bullshit had infested everything? So I don't think it's necessarily fair to judge the film itself by the same woke, not woke paradigm that we've unfortunately become accustomed to using. And there's one other thing I think this movie does well, and especially when it's contrasted with a piece of shit like Captain Marvel, and that is, you can do a girl power strong female narrative without denigrating men and without making them look either like buffoons or oppressors. Captain Marvel was basically the story of Carol Danvers recovering the memory of how every man she ever met horribly mistreated her just because she was a girl. The lesson she learns in the end is that men are even more worthy of her contempt and her disdain than she thought they were to begin with. The male characters in Black Widow, they're side players, to be sure. Their function, of course, is to make the main female characters look good, naturally, but they are not portrayed as objects of pity or as targets for resentment. Even Red Guardian, overweight, out of shape, trying to squeeze his fat ass into his old suit, still has a dignity and a nobility that no male characters in a film like Captain Marvel are allowed to have, because films like Captain Marvel only know how to elevate women by denigrating men, and that sucks, and it's shitty storytelling. Now, in the final analysis, I would say I liked Black Widow. There are areas, character development being one in particular, as I discussed, where I would rate it in the upper echelon of all the MCU films. And yeah, the gender swapping of the villain is an incredibly tired trope that I could do without, and there have been some very unfortunate remarks made in the press by people associated with the film. But in isolation, I think those are silly reasons to give a picture a bad review. And maybe that's just me. But that's all I've got. I hope you're having a pleasant weekend. See you Monday. Get off my lawn.